On January 24, 2023, 32-year-old Lindsay Clancy from Duxbury, Massachusetts, sent her husband Patrick Clancy to pick up medication and food. While he was gone, Lindsay strangled their 3 children, her 5-year-old daughter Cora, her 3-year-old son Dawson, and her 7-month-old son Callan, with exercise bands. She then jumped out of a second-floor window in an attempt to commit suicide. All 3 of her children were rushed to the hospital, where Cora and Dawson were pronounced dead. Callan was taken to Boston Children's Hospital and placed on life support, but died 3 days later. Lindsay was transported to South Shore Hospital in Weymouth, where she was treated for several broken bones in her back and rib cage. The injuries left her paralyzed below the waist. On January 25th, an arrest warrant was issued for Lindsay for 2 counts of homicide, 3 counts of strangulation, and 3 counts of assault and battery with a deadly weapon. Patrick later posted an update on GoFundMe asking the public to forgive Lindsay as I have. On February 7th, on the day of Lindsay's arraignment, her lawyer stated that she was still suicidal. She's extremely emotional. However, she's unable and has been unable to express any happiness or sadness or cry, he said in court. Lindsay has entered a plea of not guilty and will continue to be held without bail. Lindsay waived her right to appear at her court hearing, but both sides agreed she will remain at the state hospital for up to the next 6 months, where she will undergo extended mental health care. Clancy's lawyer has said that his client had postpartum depression and was over-medicated at the time of her children's deaths.
Breaking news, a 17-year-old missing for 8 years has been found alive. Authorities say he was last seen in March of 2015 while walking his dogs. The teen's dogs were found, however, the teen was never seen again. Officials say they followed up on every tip, and in the beginning they met with family and detectives out there and they found a backpack. They also talked to an owner of a catering truck who said they saw him, and there were also 2 different sightings in different places. However, the teen was unable to be located. That was up until Saturday when a Houston man reportedly found the teen alive with cuts and bruises all over his body outside of a church. They said at the time the young man was unresponsive and the Good Samaritan called 911. The missing teen is currently in the hospital and recovering. Officials said, quote, "I think there's a lot of questions." They said an investigation will take place to see what happened, where, and when, and how. I'll keep you guys updated. What do you think? Drop in the comments.
Baby, we built this house on memories. Take my picture now, shake it till you
so restless, we're too reckless. Without you here, think I care less. So I fall down and I keep doing things in a wrong way. Get stuck at the bottom. It's gotta be a better way. I got no patience to put the pieces back together. Doing all the things that bring me to the edge and I can't stop. So when I lose myself, won't you hold me down? I got my head in the clouds, running, but I'm out of touch.
All my tears have been used all on another love, another love. All my tears have been used all.
Dylan Mortensen, one of the 2 surviving roommates of the Idaho massacre, saw the killer in the house the night of the murders in the middle of the crime. According to police, Dylan told investigators that she was awoken at 4 a.m. by noises that sounded like Kaylee in a bedroom upstairs playing with her dog. Then, a little while later, Dylan said that she heard something truly chilling. One of her roommates said, quote, "There's someone here." Now, she thought it was Kaylee's voice, but police think it may have been Xana, because according to her phone records, Xana was awake at 4:12 a.m. and on TikTok. So Dylan peeks out of her bedroom but doesn't see anything. Then she hears what sounds like crying coming from Xana's room. So she looks out of her bedroom again, and that is when she hears a man saying something to the effect of, "It's okay, I'm going to help you," and we presume that man was the killer. So then Dylan opens her door for a 3rd time, and that is when she sees the killer standing in their living space wearing all black, with a mask covering his nose and mouth. He walked towards her, where she said she stood frozen in shock. Now, it's not clear at this point if she's standing right in front of him or if she just had her bedroom door open a crack. It's possible that the killer didn't even see or notice her there. But at any rate, he walked towards her, past her, towards this sliding glass door, and police believe he left the crime scene. Now, at this point, Dylan has no idea what the intruder was doing in the house or that they committed any acts of violence, but she was petrified and she went back in her room and locked herself in. The next day, Dylan was able to give police a physical description of the suspect. She described him as tall, athletically built, and had bushy eyebrows. Up until this point, police have stated multiple times that the surviving roommates likely slept through the attacks, but we now know, and they knew the whole time, that Dylan was awake. We've also understood up until now that the two survivors slept in bedrooms on the first floor. However, we know now that Dylan was asleep on the second floor and was able to see and hear the killer that way. Now, these facts that are misleading are likely a false trail that was originally laid by cops to hopefully catch the killer up in a lie.
This woman killed her husband and made him into stew. But that's not even the most shocking part of this case. Catherine Knight was an Australian abattoir worker. Her early years were horrific as her dad was an aggressive alcoholic. Her dad abused her mother, and Catherine was also SA'd by multiple family members. She would go on to meet David Kellett, who had a similar personality to her dad. He also had alcohol problems and was violent. However, he had very much met his match with Catherine. On their wedding night, she strangled him over a disagreement. Surprisingly, the pair did actually have a marriage that lasted 10 years, and they had 2 children together. However, David had many affairs. This part of the case absolutely stunned me. Shockingly, when Catherine found out about his infidelity, she actually took their 12-month-old daughter and put her on railway tracks. Thankfully, a train never came and the baby survived. Now, Catherine was placed in a psychiatric hospital for a while and did make threats to kill. Although David did briefly take her back when she was discharged, they did eventually break up. In 1986, she met a new David Saunders. He quickly moved in with her and her daughters. However, their relationship quickly became toxic too. Massive trigger warning here for animals. During one particular argument with David, as a warning to him, she slit the throat of his puppy. Shockingly, he stayed with her and they had a daughter together. The final straw for David was when she tried to kill him with a pair of scissors. She then met a new man called John and had a child with him, but she quickly cheated on him with a man called John Price. In her relationship with John Price, she would continue her violent and malicious behaviour. She framed him for stealing things from his company and he got sacked. In 2000, they had a particularly bad argument where she tried to stab him. He took out a restraining order in order to try and protect himself. However, in a horrible foreshadowing for events to come, he actually ended up telling people that if he was found dead, it would be Catherine's fault. On February the 29th, 2000, he came home, shortly followed by Catherine. When John went to bed, Catherine grabbed a butcher's knife and stabbed him 37 times. She dragged his body downstairs and hung him from a meat hook. She then cooked his body parts with potatoes and gravy. But this still wouldn't be the most shocking part of the case. After her meal, she took some pills and passed out. Police arrived at the house when it was reported that John failed to turn up for work. They found an absolutely hideous scene. Now, Catherine claimed to have no memory of what happened. At this point, police discovered containers of the human stew with names on. They realised that Catherine's plan was to feed John to her children. For killing John, for the first time in Australian history, a woman was given life in prison without parole. Catherine remains in prison to this day and denies all responsibility.
This is one of the most horrific stories I've come across, and that takes a lot. It's the story of Otty Sanchez and baby Scotty. Viewer discretion is advised, it's graphic and it's disturbing. Otty was a 33-year-old former healthcare worker in San Antonio, Texas. She'd undergone psychiatric treatment for schizophrenia and she'd been in and out of psychiatric wards for mental health problems. She was suffering from these problems when she met her boyfriend Scott, who was also in the healthcare profession and also suffered from schizophrenia. Otty fell pregnant and in July 2009 she gave birth to a son who the couple named Scotty. Scott said she was a brilliant mother, she breastfed her son and cared for him like any mother would. Otty absolutely doted on her son, but after his birth she began suffering from postnatal depression, her mental health declined and she was admitted into hospital on July 20th. She was released less than a day later, despite the fact that she'd refused to take medication to help with her intrusive thoughts. She told her boyfriend Scott that she was suffering with PND and schizophrenia and she'd be taking Scotty and going to live with her mum, sister and nieces. 5 days later, she brought Scotty to see his dad, but after asking for a copy of the birth certificate, she flew into a rage, took Scotty in his car seat, threw it into the passenger seat of the car and drove off. Scott reported this instance to the police, fearing for his son's safety, but the police merely marked it down as a disturbance. By now, Otty was suffering from postpartum psychosis. She'd expressed to officers and medical professionals that she was hearing voices, and she feared she may harm her son. Despite all of her concerns, Scotty was left in her care, and on July 26, 2009, the unthinkable happened.
I need an ambulance at 361 Wayside Drive. 351 Wayside? Is it a house or an apartment? It's a house. It's an emergency. Okay. And what's going on? What's the emergency? I'm sorry? What's the emergency? What's going on? She's hurt her child. Seriously, you hurt her child. How did she do that? What's going on with the child? The baby is dead. What did you say? The baby is dead. How old is the baby? The baby's 3 weeks. Not even 3 weeks old. 3 weeks old? Not even 3 weeks old. Please. What did she do to him? She stabbed him. There's blood all over the bed. I don't know. Where's your sister at? You said, stay there, Otty, stay there. I'm sorry. Priscilla, where's your sister at? She's just sitting on the couch. She's gone crazy last night. She was hearing voices. She kept bringing me the baby, and finally she calmed down, and I took her back to baby. And then now I just woke up to her screaming. Okay, how old is the baby? Not even 3 weeks old. The baby's dead. The baby's dead. Please, somebody come. Okay, there are other ways, but okay. No, Otty, nobody's dead. It's okay, baby. Just stay right there. Is that your sister? Yes. Oh my God, I can't believe it. Do you stand yourself? Sister, I told you to come to me. I'm not dead, Otty. I'm standing right here talking to you. Priscilla. Yes. Where did she stab herself? In the heart and in the stomach, she says. Where did she see it? I see a stab wound in her heart, yes.
When officers arrived at the home, they saw a scene that was so horrific they've had to seek counselling. Otty had used 3-bladed weapons to stab, kill, dismember and decapitate her 3-week-old son. She'd then eaten parts of his brain, his foot and his nose, saying that the devil had told her she had to do this in order to kill the demon inside her and stop an apocalypse. Otty had then stabbed herself and slashed her own throat. Otty was arrested and charged with capital murder, but after being examined by 3 separate doctors who all determined she was legally insane, she was found not guilty by reason of insanity. Otty was admitted to a state mental institution where she'll stay until the jury determines that she's not a risk to herself or others.
That is a photo of a body cam footage of a girl hysterical because her little sisters are chained up at their home for stealing food from their mom. David and Louise Turpin had 13 children that they produced together, 10 daughters and 3 sons between 1988 and 2015. They were their own children, not adopted. In the 1990s, the family moved to Fort Worth, Texas, where they hardly interacted with neighbors. In fact, neighbors can only recall a handful of times they've seen the children. However, one particular time that a neighbor of theirs saw them was a very memorable one. So a couple of the young children were playing with her daughter when she noticed their hands. It looked like they were wearing white gloves. As she got closer to them, she noticed that they were not gloves, but in fact, their own hands. She said, "Wow, your hands are really white. I thought you had gloves on." And one of the children said, "Well, it's because we can't wash past the wrist." The neighbor lady didn't know what to make of it. She just assumed that some of the children were slow, so she didn't pay any mind. In 1999, they had lost their house due to a foreclosure. The owners who moved in after them claimed that the home was left in complete squalor. They found scratch marks behind the doors, which they assumed were from dogs, but they took photos of the doors anyways. The family then moved to Rio Vista, Texas in 1999. That's where they bought a trailer to put on their property, separated from the house. So basically the trailer was for 10 of their children to live in. However, they locked it from the outside, which meant they were not allowed to leave it freely. The kids would starve, and even though the parents brought food once in a while, some of the kids were left resorting to eating mustard and ketchup packets. The family also kept them in the same clothing and haircuts, which kind of raised some eyebrows. Another thing that I need to mention is that the children did not go to public school, nor did they complete any homeschooling of some sort. In 2010, the family lost their home to another foreclosure. That's when they moved to California. About a couple months later, the eldest son, Joshua, saw some hope. After asking his mother over and over again if he can take a college class, his mom actually let him go. So in August 2010, their eldest son, Joshua, was enrolled into a class at Mount San Jacinto Community College under one condition, that Louise, the mother, would go to the campus with her son and wait outside the classroom and then immediately escort him back home. It kind of freaked out some of the students. His college education didn't really last long. Apparently, she had pulled him out after just a month or two. Then about a year passed, and David and Louise renewed their wedding vows at a Las Vegas chapel. They were accompanied by all of their children, and the photos were sent to a couple of Louise's family members. Anyways, they dressed all of the kids the same way and gave them similar haircuts as per usual. The photo is only one of a handful of photos that are taken of the family being in the outside world. Okay, so fast forward 8 years later. 8 grueling years had passed for the children as the leash they were on inched them closer to death. Things became very skewed for the children. Not only had they lacked proper education, but for years they spent their nights awake and their days asleep. The children also only got 1 meal a day, which wasn't even a real meal. It was just a sandwich and some chips, if that. And if they stole any food, they would get chained up by their parents. Now, one night when one of the kids were in the house looking for old food, they came across an old deactivated flip phone. Luckily, the charger was there, so they were able to charge it. She put it in her pocket and then moseyed on. For a couple of years already, the older children were talking about how they can escape. The phone served as their only hope. But before even attempting to do so, they had to have a plan. Because if they pulled a half-assed attempt, it could ultimately result in their death. So they had to be very careful. Now, mind you, these children were conditioned from day one. They didn't know much of what was wrong or right. About 8 of the children had never spoken to anyone else other than their family members. But that was about to change. On January 14, 2018, 17-year-old Jordan Turpin was in a bedroom with her siblings. She looked at her sisters sitting in bed with chains around their wrists. She thought to herself, if I don't do anything about this now, it's just gonna get worse. She thought to herself, look, I know I don't go to school or anything, but I know that life should not be this way. She began to talk with the eldest sibling, Jennifer. Look, we have this phone. Now is the time. We have to get the cops in here. Jennifer said, we need proof. We can't just go out there with no proof. You have to show them the conditions that we're in, otherwise they're gonna think you're lying. So with her little sister's permission, she snapped a photo of them with their chains on. Then she created a makeshift body of herself with pillows so it can appear like she's still in bed. Then she looked for a window that she can easily climb out of, and she found one. And as Jordan slid open the window and pushed the screen off, her heart was beating fast. She was also trembling, while her sister Jennifer, who was helping her out, felt the very same anxiety. As soon as Jordan's feet hit the floor, she went running. She made it out a couple blocks until she attempted to dial 911. Right after she hit the numbers, it was so hard for her to hit send, not because she thought she would regret it, but because she physically was having a hard time doing it due to her body shaking uncontrollably. But she managed to hit it. Jordan reached a dispatcher who kept her talking as she wandered around the neighborhood. Jordan was actually walking on the road instead of the sidewalks because she didn't know what sidewalks were for. Eventually, the dispatcher helped guide her to a stop sign where she could wait for a deputy to arrive. Deputy Anthony Cullis was coming to an end of a long graveyard shift when he took the dispatcher's call. When he had arrived, Jordan quickly tried to tell him everything. He then asked her if she had further proof. Do you have pictures of that? She said, yes, I do. I don't have proof of everything else, but I have proof of my sisters chained up. And she shows him the photo. And just that alone sealed the deal for him. While he called for backup, he asked her if she was injured. She said, I don't know what that word is. He also asked her if she was taking medication. She said, I don't know what that word is either. I don't know what medication is. David and Louise were arrested on suspicion of child abuse and torture. 6 younger children were transported to Riverside University Medical Center, and the 7 adult siblings were taken to the Corona Regional Medical Center. On February 22, 2019, David and Louise were then sentenced to 25 years in prison. As for the 13 Turpin children, who ranged in age from 2 to 29, the youngest children were split up into 2 separate foster homes, and the older ones were provided with emergency housing. However, the nightmare wasn't over for the younger children. They were put in homes that forced them to relive their abuse all over again. They were forced to eat excessive amount of food and then eat their own vomit, including physical abuse. Apparently, this happened for years. Children's reports were ignored by the foster care agency. When the other siblings got wind of this, an outside investigation then ensued. To make a long story short, the people that carried the abuse were finally arrested and their foster care was shut down. The children were then put into a foster home that was finally safe. As for Jordan, she is doing great. She is actually active on TikTok and is so in love with life. I applaud you for your bravery, Jordan. I'm happy that you and your siblings can now live in peace. May happiness continue to follow all of you.